Yo, welcome back to the Wrestling Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Myers, and as always, the Wrestling Strength Podcast is brought to you by Max Effort Muscle. Make sure to go to maxeffortmuscle.com for all your supplement needs. All right, guys, I am super excited today. I got a very special guest, and now this guest, if you're a young wrestler right now, you may not recognize this name. But I guarantee if you tell this name to your dad, to your uncle, to your coach, this is a name that used to strike fear in the hearts of lightweights everywhere. I got the man, Eddie Jayne, with me today. What's up, Eddie?
Hey, nice to be here, Dustin.
Yeah, good to see you. Man, I'll tell you what, Eddie, I've known you for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've been involved with the program at Watkins Memorial,
Yeah.
Really ever since I moved out here. When I first moved to Licking County, and I think 2003, you were still the head coach at that time. But even before I knew you, I knew of you.
Right.
And now this is, obviously you're a couple years older than me. When did you graduate high school?
1994.
94. So I graduated in 97. You're a couple years older than me. So it's a little bit of a different era. And in the era where we came up, you didn't know every wrestler out there. You didn't know everyone's stats. You didn't know everything. But I knew who Eddie Jayne was. You know, you were one of those wrestlers that everyone talked about. It was just one of those things like you were feared, you were a pinner, you were,
Right.
you were a 3-time champ from
Yes,
St. Ed's.
yes.
So everyone was kind of familiar with, even on the national level, everyone was familiar with Eddie Jayne. And there was no going on the internet and watching any of your matches. You couldn't go to Flow to watch highlights, something like that.
Yeah.
But you read about him in the Brakeman Report, and you may have seen him at the state tournament. People knew who Eddie Jayne was. So let's talk about the early 90s a little bit. Let's talk about maybe, what it was like coming up through, such a story program at St. Ed's. Let's start back at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Elyria, first of all, and I kind of started wrestling because my dad was a coach. We actually started out down here in Columbus, and my dad coached for Olentangy and Bishop Hartley. And in 1980, he moved up to Elyria. He got a job at Elyria High. I think he wanted to move north to where the hotbed of wrestling was, Northeast Ohio.
Now, was he from Northeast Ohio originally, or was he from Columbus?
He was from Northeast Ohio. He went to Lyndhurst Brush High School on the east side of Cleveland. But he went to Otterbein, so he graduated down here, and he's started coaching down here. But then he moved up north to Elyria High, which was a storied program, and it still is a storied program. So
Burnett's there, right?
Eric Burnett's there now, and they're always one of the top 5-10 teams in the state now. But so he started the Elyria YMCA program, and I got my start through there. My dad coached the high school team, and then after high school practice, he would coach the YMCA youth team practice, and we had a lot of studs come through that YMCA team in Elyria. And then, I wrestled at the local junior high. There weren't big clubs back then, so you just kind of always did your local school stuff. And in 8th grade, my idea was to go to Elyria High School where my dad coached. That was just always where I was going to go.
And at that time, too, just so people know, there was no 8th grade state tournament.
No.
There was no, so there was no OAC or anything like that. So maybe it wasn't as apparent back then at that time, who were the top studs in the state. You didn't really know, right?
No, you didn't really know. And mainly all my tournaments were Northeast Ohio. I mean, we didn't travel more than an hour to go to a tournament. I mean, that was kind of unheard of. I don't think it was until 8th grade where I finally went out of state. I went to Western Pennsylvania, or I went to Southern Michigan for a tournament, I remember. And that was kind of a big deal. But, you didn't really travel very far. Maybe
no Disney duels.
No Disney duels. But maybe Northeast Ohio was a little different because you were a little spoiled because there was good competition all over the place. I mean, you had Longwood Y, which is probably one of the top youth programs in the country at the time. And you had North Akron, which is just Bill Barger was getting the start there, which turned into Walsh Jesuit, the dynasty at Walsh Jesuit. So,
have you watched the documentary that Rudis just did?
No, I haven't.
You make a little cameo in it.
But people always ask me when they interview me, obviously, about the Walsh and the St. Ed's rivalry. But, so I was in 8th grade, and I just always knew I was going to Elyria High because that's where my dad coached. But then I got Coach Hada from St. Ed's. He reached out to me. I knew his sons, Robert and Ben, who were kind of my age. We did judo together at Nakamura Judo in Elyria. And Yoshi Nakamura was his son. Yoshi was
I remember watching Yoshi in high school also.
Yeah, he was a 2-time All-American at UPenn, and we got him started in wrestling at the Elyria Y. He wrestled for like a year before he went to high school. He didn't have much experience.
But he had a lot of judo experience.
He had a lot of judo. So we went to his judo club. So the Nakamuras and the Hadas and the Jaynes, we were all there. And Coach Hada's son, Robert, was a 9th grader at St. Ed's, and he said, you want to come shadow for the day and see what St. Ed's is all about? And that never crossed my mind. And it was about May, the spring before my 9th grade year. I was still in 8th grade at Northwood Junior High in Elyria. And I knew St. Ed's. I mean, I went to all the state tournaments from the time I was probably 6 years old, and the district tournaments and the sectional tournaments. I'd see St. Ed's because my dad's team, Elyria, always was at the same tournaments as St. Ed's. And, you know, Alan Freed was one of my heroes growing up. You know, I just loved the way he wrestled and competed. And so I went to St. Ed's for that one shadow day, and just from that point on, I knew I was going to go there. It was just like, wow, I could go to St. Ed's and wrestle. This is pretty cool. So yeah, I went to St. Ed's, and then my dad, who was the head coach at Elyria High for 10 years, once I got to St. Ed's, he told me he was going to come to St. Ed's too and help coach. So you know, he had coached me from the time I started all the way through 8th grade, and he was going to continue to help coach me as an assistant at St. Ed's. Mm-hmm. So I get to St. Ed's, and you know, my wrestling just kind of really jumped levels, big time.
From just being in that room.
Being in that room. I mean, I was good as a youth. You know, I wasn't one of the top kids in the state at my weight, maybe top 5 or something like that. You know, I would get beat every once in a while, but just being in that room, the intensity was a big thing. And, you know, as a coach, it's hard to replicate that. It's hard to replicate like intensity. Kids just don't know. They just don't.
You have to have the right pieces in place. So, like, as a coach, I can have a room full of kids, and I can try to make them be intense. But if they're not, if it's not the right kids, it's just not going to work. Yeah,
it's so hard to replicate that. That was the kind of the magic touch that they had at St. Ed's there, just the intensity. You know, always had a good drill partner, which was important. My freshman year, I drilled with Justin Friedel, who was a senior, 112-pounder. I was 103. And then my sophomore, junior, and senior year, I got to drill with Brad Clement. He was a state runner-up, state champ. You know, he placed out in Fargo at junior nationals. He was a year-round wrestler like me. So I always had a great drill partner. And then I always had a great coach. My freshman year, I had Dave Rowan, who was an All-American at Edinburgh. He's a lightweight guy. And then my final 3 years, I had John Heffernan, who was a state champ at St. Ed's. He was an All-American under Dan Gable. So he knew the
was an Iowa guy.
Yeah, he knew the Gable system, you know, which was, you know, just legendary, obviously, at the time. And that's how he trained us. And
I think,
I really grew under that system.
I think, you know, kind of thinking back to that era, it was even more important to I shouldn't say more important, much more impactful if you had someone in your room that was a direct lineage to someone like Gable, because that's the only way you could learn those techniques. Yeah. Like I said, you couldn't go to Flow Wrestling, or you couldn't go to the Rudis website, or that, you know, to learn these technique videos. Yeah. Now you could get on your phone and find anything in 2 seconds. Yeah. But back then, if you didn't have someone that trained under Gable to teach you these things, how would you ever get a piece of that? You couldn't. Maybe at a camp. Yeah. But it's not the same as having that in your room, you know?
You know, we didn't have any special techniques or anything, or nothing fancy. It was just, our training was probably a lot harder than everybody else's. And, you know, we did a drill session for, I think it was 45 minutes every day. And it was the same drill session day after day after day. It never changed, but it was just, you know, we did the moves, and we did them hard every day. And, you know, we just perfected what we did. It was nothing fancy.
I mean, isn't that kind of the essence of wrestling, and really of anything? If you can just get really good at the basics, have a really strong foundation, and do them with intensity and intent, day after day after day, you're going to get really good at whatever it is.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and that's what we did. I mean, just nothing fancy, just hard work, and ground it out. But, you know, it wasn't just the season, though. You know, once the season ended, you know, we had something called the Eagle Club that my dad started with Fred Clement in probably around 1991. You know, the season ended, and there weren't many clubs back then. There just weren't big clubs.
Right.
And this was one of the first ones. It was a spring and summer club. It was twice a week, about take about a week off after the state tournament, and then you get right back into it. And it went all the way up until mid-July, because we would go to Fargo and wrestle at the junior and cadet nationals out there. And we'd have 60, 70 kids in that room, just from all over Northeast Ohio. Kids would travel for an hour away, hour and a half away, just to come and train. So, we did that also. And our coach, we would go to tournaments every weekend in the spring and in the summer, So
you mentioned earlier kind of the Walsh and the St. Ed's rivalry.
Yeah, that was big.
It was huge. You know, so I mean, I remember, so I graduated in '97. I mean, I can remember, I think, watching you at the state tournament, my freshman year, which would have been probably your senior year. Was that the year that you wrestled Marchetti in the finals? Yeah. And I can remember that was the first time, again, I was young, and that might actually been the first state tournament I ever went to watch, because we didn't grow up going to it, but my drill partner, his older brother, was wrestling in the tournament that year, so we made the drive down to Dayton. It used to be down there at the Nutter Center versus Columbus, and but I can remember that being like the big storyline that everyone was talking about. Yeah. And I can remember everyone was kind of split 50-50. Like, there was people that were saying, Marchetti, this phenom, he's going to win it. And then there was other people. And I remember my drill partner, Luke, his brother, Nicky, who actually ended up winning the D2 national title at West Lib, years later. But I remember him saying, he's not going to beat Eddie Jayne. I just remember him like being so like certain about it. So that was like the first big like wrestling story. And again, like I said earlier, we'd read about it in the Brakeman report, but, there was no like hype videos leading up to it because that stuff didn't exist. Yeah.
Well, we'd wrestle earlier in the year at the Alliance tournament. It was a pretty good match.
At the Top Gun?
Top Gun.
Okay.
And then he slammed me. I got slammed. It was an illegal move. It was out of bounds, and I couldn't continue the match. And it was pretty embarrassing to me.
So you got the victory, but not the type of victory you
want.
Yeah.
I really did. It was a disqualification by illegal slam out of bounds or something like that.
Which is really was on brand for Marchetti. I mean, he's very physical.
Yeah, he's physical.
Tough.
Yeah. Just to go. Scored lots of points. Always offensive.
I remember he would just pancake guys over and over again.
Yeah.
Just like snowplow right through them,
And, I think at the state tournament, he kind of walked through, just maybe tech fall, major decision to the finals. And it's interesting that you said, I was really hyped up because, I didn't know all that hype was going on.
Well, you remember, I'm up in the nosebleeds. This is what people are up in the peanut gallery are talking about. Well, Jayne versus Marcetti.
Yeah, until, just a couple years ago, my dad was talking about that match. And, he's saying how I was all hyped up and people were really talking about it. And, I was just kind of really in a zone or, just kind of cut off from the real world whenever I was at a tournament like that. Like our coach Huffman, you probably got this from Gable. We would go there and wrestle, and as soon as we were done wrestling, we would get out of that arena. Because, just sitting there all day and just it's just tiring. It just kind of tires you out. So we wouldn't be there very long. We would get there, wrestle, and get out, and we were just kind of in our own little world. And, we didn't watch our teammates really compete that much. We just really focused on ourselves. So
I think there's something to that, and it's something I never realized when I was in high school wrestling. But it's exhausting being in the bleachers and watching people. And it never occurred to me, even when thinking about wrestling, until later in life, like in my late 20s, I started boxing. Yeah. And my boxing coach, we go to my first tournament was at the Arnold Sports Festival, the Arnold Classic. And we got there, and in my head, I'm thinking, I'm going to be watching boxing all day. He said, no, we're not going to watch any boxing. So we went, he found like a locker room under the bleachers that like wasn't being used. And we literally stayed in there all day. Yeah. He's like, listen, he's like, the roar of the crowd, the emotions of watching people fight. He's like, it's going to drain you. He said, the first time I want you to feel the crowd is when we walk out there for your fight. And that's what we did. And, hearing you say, you're probably the first person I ever heard say that, but that's a really smart coaching move, not to have you guys out there in the stands watching all day.
No, we had a van. We would shuttle back to the hotel, and there was like a constant shuttle back and forth. And, you would hear about, hey, our heavyweight, he won his match, and, but you weren't there watching him. He said, you just take care of yourself, and if you take care of yourself, that'll take care of the team, So anyway, back to the Marcetti match. Yeah. So we both made it to the finals, and I knew I had them. And, that warm-up, I never had a warm-up like that before a match. I probably warmed up a little earlier than I usually did. I had those. I was really anxious, probably those nerves. I had to just work them out.
And at this point, you're going for your third straight title,
third
right?
straight title. And I just did a lot of self-talk to myself. Like, I knew he was good, and I knew it was going to be a tough match, and there's just a lot of self-talk to myself, just a lot of positive talk, positive. I've trained hard for this. I'm the returning state champ. I'm the senior. He's a freshman. Just a lot of positive talk to myself. I just remember a lot of pacing back and forth and shadow drilling back in that Nutter Center. And then I had a coach, Joe Sylvester. He's a really fiery guy. He wrestled at St. Ed's. He wrestled at North Carolina. He's a state champ at St. Ed's. And he gave me a really good speech before the match. He was really fiery and just, about a minute or two, he just got in my face and just, you deserve this. You're going to win this match. He's not as good as you, and just kind of got me really fired up. And I went out there and, not luckily, but, I scored within probably the first 10 seconds of the match. Fake shot and snapped him down and got a real easy score. And from then on, when I get that first score of the match, it just kind of calms your nerves, and it's just like gives you a lot of confidence, I think, if I could get that first score of the match. And I did, and from then on, it was kind of smooth sailing in the match. I kind of had control of the whole match. But it was back and forth at the beginning. There wasn't really a lot of takedowns. Not until the third period did I really break it open.
What was the final score of the match? I can't remember.
10-2, a major decision. But, it was close the first
probably maybe
period
a closer match than the final score.
Yeah, at the end I hit him with a slide by and then took him right to his back. I wanted that pin so bad.
And you were known as a pinner too.
Yeah. I held him on his back for a good 20, 25 seconds to end the match. I think he got off at the very end, but man, I thought it'd be sweet to get the pin. But I got 3 back points, 2 takedowns. I loved the pin. I did love the pin guys. St. Ed's was known for their half Nelson, just a simple half Nelson, like not a fancy move. I mean, that's the first pinning hold you learn as a youth is a half Nelson.
Right.
And I tell my kids when I coach them, guys, all we drilled at St. Ed's was a half Nelson. That's the only move we drilled on top every day. We drilled it for, all different variations of it.
Well, that's the thing. It's always there. The half is always there.
Yeah.
And if you have a kid that's really good at it, knows how to stay really tight on top and how to be really aggressive, you're going to pin a lot of kids.
Yeah. So that was my hold on top, and I did a little armbar stuff. I kind of learned from Doug Bluebaugh. Mm-hmm. He was around Ohio State at the time when I was coming up, and I remember anytime we saw Doug Bluebaugh, my dad would grab him and have him show me a little bit of his armbar and hammerlock work. I remember being behind the bleachers at the tournaments, and Doug, come here, let's work on this a little bit. And he was almost like legally blind, and he was a big guy, and we'd be on the concrete floor, and he'd be working on me with some moves.
That's like total classic wrestling dad stuff, right?
Yeah.
You're at a tournament behind the bleacher. You see a legendary coach or wrestler, whatever. You have hey, come over to show this. Yeah, I know you're 240 pounds, but show this on my 100-pound kid real quick.
Yeah.
And
I mean, my dad always did that. He was never shy of asking anybody to help. I mean, I remember just all the time it was like that. We'd see Kenny Sherto around. Kenny Sherto was an Olympian in '88. He recruited me to go to Penn State, and he was the coach at Ohio State at the time. Anytime we were at a tournament, Kenny, come here and work on Eddie with this slide by. And that's where I got a really good slide by. Mm-hmm. And any wrestlers we would see, NCAA champions, and they never said no. They were always willing with their time. It's like, I don't know if they knew my dad or not, but he reached out to him, and he just always picking up tips from people.
Well, you got to think, like, the worst thing that's going to happen is the person's going to say no.
Yeah.
And typically you put someone on the spot like that, they're not going to say no.
Yeah.
Even if they kind of don't feel like doing it, they're going to help you. So, I mean, I think really in any situation, you can't be scared to ask for help. The worst thing someone will do is say no. Now, you had a younger brother, or have a younger brother, Mark.
Mark, yeah.
And I remember Marky coming up. He would have been maybe a year or two younger than me.
Yeah, he graduated St. Ed's in 2000.
Okay, so he was... Yeah, so he must have been a freshman then when I was a senior. But I remember watching him. He was tough. I remember watching. We went to Medina that year. Yeah. So I remember watching him there. I was like, there's another Jayne, because of course we didn't know, because you didn't really know who was coming up or whatever.
So he was a 4-time Medina champ. He was the only person ever and still ever to win Medina 4 times.
Really?
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah. He was on some legendary teams at St. Ed's. I mean, national championship teams. They had guys, I think on his team, they had like 4 or 5 guys who became All-Americans in college, which is crazy. Mm-hmm. But he was really big into judo, even more so than me. So he had a different dimension to him. He could throw you. He would throw you.
Well, I think I'm trying to. It's hard to remember the years here, but I feel like that year, which would have been when he was a freshman, I was a senior. I think Yoshi would have been on that team, right? Or maybe Yoshi's brother was on that team.
No,
Yoshi
it was probably Yoshi, maybe Andy Hrovat, Michael Sickie, Gray Maynard.
Yeah, Gray was on that team.
I mean, all these guys were All-Americans in college. Hrovat went on to be an Olympian. Mm-hmm. Ryan Bertine was an NCAA champion. I mean, oh my gosh. They had Mason Lenhard, who was a 3-time state champ. I mean, they were just loaded. Yeah, that was 97. Yep. St. Ed's teams.
So you said his style was there. He incorporated more judo, more throws and stuff.
He did, yeah. He wrestled Greco. He wrestled a lot of Greco-Roman. He was a Greco-Roman national champion out in Fargo. Multi-time All-American in Greco-Roman. So yeah, he just had a different dimension, and grabbing a high school kid up top, upper body. I mean, how many times you don't train throws in high school practices? Hardly ever. I mean,
right.
So you grab a guy upper body. I mean, they don't know what to do. And he won a state title with one of his state titles with a nice throw, a headlock throw to a pin in the state finals.
I'm a big headlock fan. I love headlocks. Yeah. And I don't know why they're demonized by, you'll talk to youth parents. They'll be like, don't go to that club. They teach headlocks there. You better not let my kid do a headlock. I'm like, why not teach an 8-year-old how to do a headlock? Yeah. I think headlocks are great. You see it work at the highest levels of the sport.
Yeah. I teach it in middle school. I haven't taught it this year, but I teach it. Why not have that tool in your back pocket, especially if you're losing a match? I mean, if you're losing by 5, a double leg's not going to help you out in the last minute of the match. Or you can catch a guy, who doesn't expect it. And,
now, I remember at NCAAs a couple years ago, I think it was in Pletcher, maybe Pletcher was wrestling Tariq Wilson for 3rd and 4th, and he was down in the last 10 seconds, and he tried to headlock him. Now, he missed it.
Yeah.
But he went for it, and I loved it because I was like, that's what you're supposed to do. Yeah. I don't know why so many guys just cede the last 10 or 20 seconds of the match if they're down and just, they just, let the guy post on them and don't try anything or maybe try a little low-level shot or something. Like, even if they get that, they're not going to win. Yeah. Try the headlock. Yeah. You either get it or you don't.
Well, a couple of years ago, Jason Null from Penn State, who was a multi-time NCAA champion.
Yep. Sorry, I pulled the cord out of my mic. Go ahead, keep going.
No, he was hitting a lot of headlocks, and I was like, that's great. I mean, he was hitting them in just the middle of the match. It was unexpected. He would just
nickel would
out of nowhere, just boom, hit guys with a headlock. It was unexpected, and he was getting them.
Yeah, guys that are a good headlocker, they're dangerous. You know.
Yeah.
So any of you middle school coaches that are watching, you heard Eddie say it. He's a St. Ed's legend. He teaches the headlock. You guys should be teaching headlocks. All right.
It's okay.
I might headlock somebody in the gym today. You never know.
Yeah. That'll catch him off guard.
Yeah. Actually, Colin headlocked Keyshawn the other day in here in the gym. Man, it sounded like he about broke his ribs when they landed on the mat in there. They're just in there messing around in between sets or whatever. So, yeah, man. So I'm really going down kind of memory lane thinking about all this stuff because, I wrestled in high school but wasn't a good wrestler. But remember watching, your brother, Yoshi, Gray Maynard, all these guys. And it's like, Marchetti. Marchetti was in my weight class my senior year.
Oh, really?
Thankfully. Actually, I think in Medina, if I would have won my second match, I would have wrestled him. I was actually kind of glad that I didn't, because I would have just got completely ragdolled by him. But I remember that, you wrestled when he was a freshman. He was really good then. And then he got kind of developed legendary status throughout high school. He was another guy people were they were scared to wrestle him. He was just so physical.
Yeah.
And I think, this was at a time when it wasn't common for guys to win 4 state titles. You talk about, Marchetti won 3.
Yeah.
You won 3.
Well, Marchetti won 2.
Oh, he won 2. Who beat him?
I think he was injured one year.
Oh, okay.
He couldn't wrestle. He had to sit out a year. Yeah.
Okay. Well, regardless, though, it just was not common for people to win 4 titles.
So it was different. Even 3 was So the first year Division I wrestler, ever won 4 titles.
Willie Weinberg,
was
right?
Willie Weinberg, and he was in my weight my freshman year. We always trained together. I stayed at his house, in the summer and for camp and trained. We were always on summer teams together. We never wrestled a competitive match together, though. We were always kind of one weight apart. But yeah, kids didn't come. Like I was only the second 3-time state champ from St. Ed's.
Which is crazy to think about,
Alan
right?
Freed was the first. I mentioned him earlier. He was.
Yeah, I
really looked up to him. He was my hero.
So did he? He only won 3 also.
He won 3.
So think about that. One of the greatest high school wrestlers ever only won 3 at that time.
One of the greatest ever, for sure. There was not the national scene and the club scene at the youth level like there is now. So now youth wrestlers, they're getting trained by elite wrestlers. I mean, guys who are training them could be college coaches, or our former college coaches that are training these kids, and these kids are on a national scene now. They're traveling all over the country and getting so many matches.
Yeah, I have kids that start with me when they're 5th, 6th grade, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, whatever.
Yeah.
They train with me. So imagine back in the day saying, "Hey, I want to hire a private strength coach."
Yeah.
That would just never happen.
No.
My parents would have been like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
So maybe they come and work with me. I've worked with Ohio State for years and years. Trained guys that on the world team, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So you got youth kids training with me, and they're going to Logan Stieber, world champ.
Oh yeah.
Those type of things just really didn't exist.
No.
Back in the day. Kids are just advancing so much quicker.
Oh, the level of youth wrestling when I go to there was no state tournament like there's there. There's the OAC state tournament for junior high. There's OAC state tournament for youth. And when I go there, the level of wrestling, I just oh my gosh, it's unbelievable. 8-year-old kids who are hitting techniques that's super advanced, or these middle school kids. I'm like, that level of technique was what I was hitting when I was in college. I mean, really, I didn't know all those techniques at that age or until I was in college. It's just unbelievable the level of wrestling.
Well, I think
at a young age.
I think you'll hear guys that'll they always live in the past. They'll say, "Oh, well, it used to be tougher back in my day," or people, back in the day, guys worked harder. I think it's the opposite. I think kids are tougher now. Kids are better now. Kids are they're more advanced physically now. They're more complete athletes at a younger age.
Oh, definitely.
Definitely compared to back in the day.
Yeah. I mean, and when wrestling season was over, most kids it was over. I mean, it ended in March. You might do a couple spring tournaments, and that was it. Now kids are training almost 12 months, at least 9 months. A lot of these kids, because these clubs are open year round, pretty much. I mean, there were no clubs to go to. It was your local team. It was the YMCA. You wrestled for your YMCA program. I wrestled at the Leary YMCA. There was Northeast Ohio. Every YMCA had a team, like the West Shore YMCA, Longwood YMCA. They were a Y team. It was just all these Y teams, and we competed against each other. There was a Catholic league too up there. That's where St. Ed's is called the Catholic Youth Organization, CYO. Every school had its own team. And, after March, there was really not much wrestling to go to. I mean, you might find a couple rooms here and there where people were wrestling together, but there's no big club system. So that's been a big progression in the sport for kids.
So now I'm just wondering if, obviously Northeast Ohio has always been, kind of really far ahead of the rest of the state, definitely ahead of Central Ohio.
Yeah.
I think Central Ohio has gotten better, but I'm just wondering, thinking back to the early 90s, like you said, there was no real clubs, but there was really strong community-based programs.
Yeah.
Northeast Ohio. I wonder if that was the case here in Central Ohio, or if there's other kind of factors at play, why this area has, traditionally just lagged behind the northern part of the state. What's your take on it? Being that you live and coach here now and have for years, and you came up in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah. I think a lot of it was the culture. I mean, you had dads and grandpas and stuff who had been through legendary programs up there. You had Maple Heights up there. You had some of the great East Cleveland schools up there that had just great wrestling for decades and decades and decades in St. Ed's. And and so you had so many people go through these great programs, and then they became coaches. So I think it's just more in the culture. You had just dads and uncles and grandpas all go through it. And down here, I don't know if they had that so much. But yeah, I think that's one part of it, but
it's definitely a cultural thing, I would think,
Yeah.
I think maybe it's one of those things like if you have kind of a lineage in your family, in your community, there's dads and the uncles and the grandfather and everyone that came through some type of legendary program. It's like you kind of grow up more in a wrestling family. And I think maybe it's, for whatever reason, not as prevalent in Central Ohio where, maybe kids are kind of trying wrestling. They're like the first wrestler in their family or whatever.
Yeah.
They're trying it for the first time. So maybe it's just a different dynamic like that.
Yeah. So I remember down here when I started coaching, it was a lot of that. Like there was a lot of kids, like you said, they were like first generation wrestlers. And, the parents don't really get it. They don't get the training or they don't get it. You got to show up to practices. Even over like on a Saturday, you might have to practice on a Saturday during the season, or you might have to practice during Thanksgiving break or Christmas break, or training in the off season is important. If they didn't do it, they just don't get it, and they don't always push their kids to do all that. But I noticed, I think those are the big things that kind of shocked me down here when I first started. Was how many kids, their parents weren't into it. They didn't know, and maybe no fault of their own. They just weren't in it. So in Northeast Ohio,
it was just already kind of like a given. Like, all right, my kid's a wrestler.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a big time commitment.
Yeah.
They're gonna have to stay in shape year round.
Yeah. The parents were all in. Because they had done it and they knew what it took to be great. So, and that's what they expected of their kids. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember when I first moved to Pataskala, it was 2003. What year did you start coaching at Watkins?
2002, 2003.
Okay. So I can remember kind of that first group of kids that probably came up through your system.
Mm-hmm.
You guys had a good team. You guys were D2 at the time.
Yeah.
But I remember, the Huffman brothers.
Yeah. Justin Huffman.
Yeah, who was a finalist for you, who I still keep in touch with. He comes back and plays guitar at my dad's cookout every year and stuff.
He's a workaholic.
Yeah.
It's a good story about him. His junior year, he didn't even make it out of the sectional tournament.
Really?
He did not make it out of the sectional tournament. And then that summer, he was the hardest worker I've ever coached. He started wrestling in 7th grade.
And going back to his junior year real quick, I mean, he was probably expected to make it out of sectionals, right?
Yeah.
He just underperformed.
Yeah, kind of got upset. Had a decent season. But that summer, I took him. I had a freestyle club called the Warrior Wrestling Club, and we had all the best kids in Lincoln County come. We probably had 70, 80 kids in that room at Watkins, and, he did that all spring and summer with me, and then he would want me to take him to a tournament every weekend, and he made the junior national team, and so he wrestled out in Fargo, so he got that good training and got around those elite level wrestlers. Mm-hmm. Just saw what intense training is, kind of like we talked about earlier about St. Ed's, just being around great athletes and just seeing how you should train, how you should wrestle. But then also during the summer, he would call me up at like 9 or 10 o'clock, or in the afternoons to, Coach, can you come train with me tonight? What time? About 9:30. Sure, I'll do whatever you want. I'm here for you. And he would ride his bike in the dark, get there in the summertime because he was a lifeguard somewhere at some pool.
And so he would get off work when it got dark, and then he would ride.
Off work, ride his bike there. We would train. He'd ride his bike back home. Probably 10 o'clock at night. I mean, he was just a freak. He would do whatever it took. He just loved to train. And, he'd call me all summer long. We'd just come in. Whenever he called me, I would be there. And, Coach, can you take me out to Central Crossing for open mats? Okay, let's go. But he took the initiative, and if he wanted to do it, I would be there for him. And in his senior year, I was an assistant coach on the high school team at that time, we drilled just about every day in practice. So I'd really, he loved to go hard. So I would go as hard as he wanted to go. And, it was pretty cool to see him make the state finals this senior year, starting from 7th grade. You don't see that very much. Kids starting in 7th grade now making it to the state finals.
That's like unheard of.
Yeah, it's unheard of. That was in 2003. That was still kind of rare back then, but, it could happen a little more back then. But
well, and especially, it's not like he was a qualifier the year before maybe made the podium or whatever. But yeah, to not even make it.
Not even make it. But he just worked his tail off. Like, I was super proud of him. I just love looking back on that story. And I tell kids all the time, I said, look up, his name's up on the board there. I just told my kids last week the story. I said, Justin Huffman up there, He wasn't a special athlete or anything. He wasn't a freakishly strong or super athlete. He was the hardest worker I've ever coached in this wrestling room. And if you come in here and you work hard every single day, good things are going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a great story, man. So you had a nice little run there. You had had a good team. You had some tough kids or whatever. Now you're still involved with the middle school program.
Yeah, I coach in middle school.
So now maybe at this stage in your life, do you like coaching the young kids better than you did maybe the high school kids? Do you enjoy it? Like, it's a different feel to it, right?
Yeah, super different. One of the big reasons I do it is because I get off of work a little later. I used to teach at the middle school, and we got off at the same time as the high school. Now I teach 4th and 5th grade phys ed at Watkins Intermediate School, and we get out a lot later, so it's I can't make it to the high school practice. So I coach in the middle school. And yeah, it's different. I mean, you have so many different levels of wrestling. You have kids who come in and they've never wrestled before in their life. It's their first practice of their life, and you have kids who've wrestled 5 or 6 years, all in the same room, and you're trying to coach them at the same time. So that's a real challenge. And now the other challenge, we have girls on the team. So now we have 8 girls on the team this year, and they're all in the same practice. So yeah, I enjoy it. Just really teach them the basics, and that's what works anyway. So yeah, and it's tough. I mean, you have kids who want to work hard. You have kids who don't quite understand working hard yet, and they're kind of there just to be part of the team and have fun and maybe goof around most of the practice, and you try to get them back on track. And it's interesting. And you're trying to teach them the culture of wrestling. Trying to get them there to practices is a challenge sometimes. Get their parents to understand it. That's a challenge. But it's still a lot of work. I still put a lot of time into it. Try to share everything I know about wrestling with them, and then I try to do stuff in the off season with them. I'm going to take them to an Ohio State match, and I took them to a camp last summer, the Jordan Train Camp. I just try to expose them to as many things as I was exposed to as a kid, and try to get them to do some training in the off season. I provide that for them. So,
well, I think even if some of the not every one of these kids is gonna progress to become a state champion.
No, yeah.
But if you can take some of these young boys and girls at the middle school level, and you can actually take them from just some kid that came in for the first time to now get them to understand how to work hard.
Yeah.
Think about what an impact that's going to have on the rest of their life, not just on how many wrestling matches they're going to win or whatever. I think that understanding how to work during uncomfortable circumstances is really the key to everything, And so I think, just you still being involved, especially at that middle school level, it's almost like it's possible to almost have a bigger and broader impact on a community at a level like that versus being the high school coach and working with kids who have already been in it for a long time.
Yeah, that is important. Just that aspect of hard work, how it transfers over into school and into life. I think that's one of the big things I got out of wrestling, and I think it came mostly from St. Ed's, just hard work. And I think that transfers over to my daily life. I mean, I just think I can outwork anybody in anything I do. I still believe that.
Yeah.
So, I think I definitely got that from wrestling, for sure.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, obviously you know the story, but I want to tell it for anyone who's listening right now. This was maybe, 2-3 years ago, and, I'm kind of known for the same thing. Like, I feel like I'm not a good athlete. I've never been a good athlete, but I can work really hard. I understand how to push myself. I understand how to push when I'm uncomfortable. So that makes me good at certain things.
Yeah.
Well, there was a little community 5K, and my wife's like, oh, we should all go do it as a family. I'm like, all right, that'll be fun. My dad's in town and stuff. But in my head, I'm thinking, I'm going to win this. There's no one here in Patasko that's going to beat me in this 5K. Well, I show up with my family, and there behind the bleachers is Eddie Jayne warming up his hamstrings and running. I said, shit, Coach Jayne's here.
That was a good race, yeah.
Yeah, so I said, oh, Eddie, I said, what pace are you going to run today? And I think you said something like, the pace that's going to win it. And I was like, oh, all right. So anyway, long story short, we warmed up. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to run with you, Eddie. And right out of the gate, you came out hot. And I knew what you were doing. I'm like, he's trying to break me in this first mile. So you held a really strong pace. I hung with you maybe the first mile and a half or whatever. Yeah. And then you just you had a little gap between us, and I just couldn't make it up. So I finished within sight of you, but I just could not catch you on that. Once we got into like kind of deep water of it, that around like the 2 mile mark. So I finished, I think it may be first in my age group, but second overall. I could not beat the Northeast Ohio legend, Eddie Jayne.
Yeah, it was good to see you there that day. I remember that. It was a good race. I put some training into that. I hate to go into an event and feel like I haven't trained, so I wanted to be confident going into that. But, I do a lot of running. In my gym class, every class I make the kids run 6 minutes. And I run every class with them. So I get in. I have 7 classes now, so I get in a good 42 minutes running every day, 6 minutes at a time. So I do a lot of running.
Well, you need to come do a track workout with us sometime. We still go over to the Watkins track and do stuff in the spring.
Yeah.
I run every year on my birthday. It's kind of like a milestone I do. I run a timed 400. I've been doing it, I think, since I turned 35. So I'll be 43 this year. And my original goal was to try to break 60, which I did after 2 or 3 years. And I've been running like in the 57s for the past few years. So now I want to see if I can still run sub 60 by the time I get to 50.
Wow.
So I got to do it for 7 more years in a row. No big deal.
Yeah.
But you should come running with us this year.
I will.
All right.
Let me know.
All right. So one last thing before we go. Number one, this was great. I hope any of the other, coaches and dads and guys out there around my age, you got taken down a trip like down memory lane of nostalgia there. This was a lot of fun for me. So, but something I like to ask everyone that comes on, because this is the wrestling strength show, even though we didn't really talk about strength training. There's kind of 3 questions. I think there's 2 or 3. One of which is, what do you feel like, kind of strength conditioning wise, back then in the early 90s, what do you feel like really helped prepare you for wrestling? It could be a conditioning thing, a lifting thing, whatever. But what do you feel like was something that you felt like always kind of translated into success for you on the mat, training wise?
A couple things. Well, first of all, gymnastics. Bob Dealey, who's a legend in Central Ohio, he was the uncle to the DeSabato.
Okay.
The DeSabato brothers. And Bob Dealey had a son named Bob Dealey Jr., wrestled down here maybe at DeSales, I believe. Would have been in the 80s or something. So my dad started out down here, and my dad was big in the wrestling scene down here in the 1970s in Central Ohio. I mentioned Hartley and Olentangy. And so, he knew everybody in the scene, and Bob Dealey was one of the big guys down here. And Bob Dealey told my dad, he said, you got to get your son into gymnastics. Bob Dealey's son, Bob Dealey Jr., he got his son into gymnastics, and I think he was a state champ, Bob Dealey Jr. So my dad did that. He got me into gymnastics probably when I was 4 years old. I see a picture I have this picture of myself in like this white T-shirt, red shorts, and there's like these 3 girls around me with red leotards on, and we're in a gymnastics club in Westerville. I was the only boy in it. I was probably 4 years old. And then when we moved up to Elyria, I did gymnastics lessons from the time, I was 5 until the time I was probably 11. I stopped them when I got to middle school. But gymnastics, man, you want to build up your strength, your body awareness, your balance.
Just body control in space.
It's huge. Yeah. And so, it's amazing how many kids can't even do a cartwheel. Like, even on my middle school wrestling team.
Right.
They can't do a cartwheel, or they can't do a forward roll or a backward roll, How can you control another person's body in wrestling when you can't even control your own body, you know?
Right.
How can you push up from the bottom in referee's position or on your belly when you can't even do a push-up yourself? So gymnastics was huge for my athleticism and my strength development. And then also my dad just did things with me. Like he hung a rope from the tree in our front yard. So I'm sure we're the only family in the neighborhood that had a climbing rope in the front yard.
But I'll tell you what, almost every guest I have on here has some type of, it's either my dad hung a climbing rope from the tree or in the garage or something. Almost everyone's come on and said that same thing. Even, Anthony Echemendia, he said he had one in his living room. Yeah. They had one inside the house.
So we had that growing up. And then my dad would have these workouts with like a heavy sandbag. And it was just like maybe a 35-pound sandbag, and there's 12 exercises that you would do, and he would put me through that. I didn't really start doing real strength training like dumbbells, barbells, that kind of stuff until I got to high school. But so all that other stuff I think really helped with my just making me stronger, a better athlete.
So parents, coaches out there, get your kids in gymnastics. If that's not an option, think about ways you can implement some of that stuff. Forward rolls, cartwheels, things like that into maybe you're part of your dynamic warm-up. Yeah. Those are great things to do, in the wrestling room to have your kids warming up and gaining coordination and strength and body control.
And another thing, my dad, everything he did was had a thought towards wrestling. he put in our backyard a little playground, a little jungle gym, but it had the monkey bars where you go across. So he'd always have us go across the monkey bars, back and forth, back and forth. And, that works your grip strength and your arm strength. So, all those kinds of little things that you do. As a kid, you don't think you're going through a weight training session. You're just doing these things.
You're just playing.
Yeah, but through playing, you're developing your strength.
Well, that's why I did it for myself, but also the main reason I did this was with my kids in mind is I put a pull-up bar and parallel bars in my yard at my old house. So that way, my kids, as soon as they were, 3, 4, 5 years old, they're out there climbing on them all day and, building grip strength and coordination. And to them, they're just playing, because it wasn't really, now I do actual structured workouts with my son, but at the time it'd be like, hey, let's go hang from the bar and swing. And I would let him he would make up his own exercise. He'd call this one's a bacon, and he'd, whatever. He would pull himself up and hold himself up over the bar. And this one's, he would just give him funny names or whatever. So we talked about what parents should do and what your dad did. What is the one thing you think coaches and or parents need to stop doing with their wrestlers right now? What do you think, like, hey, this is pointless or this is detrimental? What do they need to stop doing?
I don't know if you're thinking of a physical thing or a mental thing, but
either one.
I think a mental thing, like yelling at your kids when they lose or getting mad at your kids when they lose. I mean, I think that I see that at youth tournaments all the time. Oh my gosh, it drives me nuts. I almost don't like going to youth tournaments anymore because it makes me so upset. It just turns my stomach when I see a kid lose, or the kid might shed a tear and the dad grabs him and shakes him or yells at him.
Yeah, like what is that accomplishing at that point?
The kid didn't go out there on the mat trying to lose.
Right.
Right? That wasn't the kid's point when he went out there on the mat. And that's got to turn so many kids away from the sport really quick and not want them to love the sport. Thankfully, my dad never did that. There was never a time I lost and I came off the mat. My dad yelled at me for losing.
Right.
Just didn't happen. And
what?
I don't know what would happen if he did that. I'm sure it would have been detrimental in some way, our relationship or wrestling, or maybe it would make a kid super anxious to go out on the mat and wrestle, wouldn't it? I mean, you wouldn't think about wrestling. You would think about wrestling, but in the back of your mind, you'd think about, if I lose this match, my dad's going to yell at me when I get off the mat. Right. And I think that would make a kid super nervous and anxious before they even stepped on the mat. I just think that's the worst thing in wrestling.
I think one of the most, if not the most important thing as a child is you want to please your parents. You want that approval from your parents.
Yeah.
And so if you number one, if you lose a match And now, like, obviously that's a terrible thing. Like, you don't want to lose, especially in front of everyone, and it can be embarrassing. And there's the physical element too. You might have got like physically beat up a little bit, but now to lose the approval of your parents, like I think it would just feel terrible.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's a good thing, much better than anything physical that coaches or parents are doing with their kid they shouldn't be doing. Yes, quit yelling at your kid when they lose. Obviously, they want to lose. They want to please you.
Yeah.
They want to, they want your seal of approval. So I think yelling at your kid, especially right when they come off the mat, they got to go.
That's the worst. Yeah. Now, when I did lose, I mean, my dad always had every match videotaped, and he would study it and take notes. And, a day later, we wouldn't talk about that match, on the ride home. The next day, probably a Sunday, or usually it was a Sunday, we would watch the film and look at the notes, and we'd go in the basement in the wrestling mat, and then we'd work on that stuff. And, that was way more productive than him yelling at me. And let the dust settle. Yeah,
give it a day or two.
Yeah, let the dust settle, and where me as a wrestler, I wasn't upset anymore really about it, and I could be productive and looking at it, maybe at a middle school or high school age, and learn from it. What do you learn when you get off the mat and your dad yells at you? Does that make you better? No,
and it's just going to increase anxiety, which is going to decrease performance.
Yeah. Take some time, like you said, let the dust settle, and then, a day or two later, then go over it and learn something from it and get better from it. So I think I did that a lot. I had some losses in high school, and I never lost to a kid twice, though. I lost to Sean Cantos. He was a junior national champion out in Fargo, and I had to wrestle him 2 more times. I had to wrestle him in the state tournament, and I beat him.
Where was he from?
He was from Toledo, St. John.
Okay.
So in 1991, he won junior nationals in freestyle and Greco out in Fargo. I mean, he tore people up. I had to wrestle him my sophomore year in the semifinals of the state tournament, and he had beat me earlier in the year. I think we wrestled 3 times that year. He beat me the first time, and I learned from it. Watched the video, took notes, or my dad took the notes, and we studied it and just learned from it. And so I got better, and I kind of knew what he did, and I was able to beat him the next 2 times. But yeah. So I think the thing is just parents can be more productive in the way they deal with losses.
Well, I'll tell you what, Eddie, I appreciate you coming on and talking to me today. This was, like I said, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate you and definitely everything that you do for the wrestling community here in Licking County. And I'm looking forward to running with you on the track and maybe getting my revenge this upcoming fall.
5K.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, man. Take care.
Thank you.